The morning sun cast long shadows across Millfield's quiet suburban streets as Officer Marcus Rivera began his routine patrol. It was supposed to be another ordinary Tuesday in the small town where nothing much ever happened. The biggest excitement usually came from Mrs. Henderson's cat getting stuck in her apple tree or teenagers skateboarding where they shouldn't. Marcus had been working this beat for 8 years, and he knew every corner, every shortcut, and every family in the neighborhood. At 34, Marcus was the kind of cop who still believed in community policing. He knew the names of the kids who walked to school each morning, waved at the elderly folks tending their gardens, and always had time to help someone change a flat tire. His fellow officers sometimes teased him about being too friendly, but Marcus believed that building relationships was just as important as enforcing laws. That morning he was driving slowly down Maple Street when he noticed something unusual. A small figure was walking along the railroad tracks that ran parallel to the residential area. The tracks hadn't seen regular train traffic in years, but Marcus knew that the freight company still used them occasionally for cargo runs. More concerning was the fact that the figure appeared to be a child, and there was something moving beside him. Marcus pulled his patrol car to the side of the road and got out, shielding his eyes from the morning glare. Sure enough, it was a young boy, probably around 10 years old, walking along the tracks with what looked like a medium-sized dog trotting alongside him. The boy seemed oblivious to any danger, kicking at loose gravel and talking animatedly to his four-legged companion. "Hey there," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the distance. The boy looked up, startled. For a moment it seemed like he might run, but the dog beside him wagged its tail, seeming to sense that the uniformed man approaching meant no harm. As Marcus got closer, he could see the boy more clearly. He was small for his age, with tousled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. His sneakers had holes in them, and his jeans were patched at the knees. But what struck Marcus most was the boy's eyes. They were bright and intelligent, but there was something guarded about them, a wariness that seemed too mature for such a young face. The dog was a mixed breed, probably part German Shepherd and part something else. Its coat was a rich golden brown, and despite looking a bit thin, it moved with the loyal alertness of a dog deeply bonded to its human companion. The dog positioned itself protectively between the boy and Marcus, not aggressively but watchfully. "I'm Officer Rivera," Marcus said, stopping a respectful distance away and crouching down to appear less intimidating. "What's your name, son?" The boy glanced around as if looking for an escape route, then seemed to make a decision. "I'm Danny," he said quietly. "This is Rusty." He gestured to the dog, who tilted his head at the mention of his name. "Nice to meet you both," Marcus replied with a genuine smile. "Mind if I ask what you're doing out here on the tracks? It's pretty early in the morning." Danny's shoulders tensed and he looked down at his feet. "We were just walking," he mumbled. "We weren't hurting anything." Marcus had dealt with enough kids over the years to recognize the signs. This wasn't a child out for an early morning adventure. Something else was going on. The boy's defensive posture, his worn clothes, and the way he seemed to be carrying a small backpack suggested he might be running away from something. Or someone. "I'm not saying you were hurting anything," Marcus said gently. "I'm just concerned about safety. These tracks can be dangerous, and trains do come through sometimes, though not very often." Danny looked up sharply. "Trains? But nobody ever uses these tracks. They're all rusty and covered with weeds." "That's true most of the time," Marcus nodded. "But the freight company does send cargo trains through here occasionally. Maybe once or twice a month. The problem is you never know when they're coming." As if on cue, both Marcus and Danny felt a faint vibration through the ground. It was so subtle that they might have imagined it, but Rusty's ears immediately perked up, and he began looking around alertly. "Did you feel that?" Danny asked, his voice suddenly smaller. Marcus felt it too, a barely perceptible tremor that seemed to travel up through the soles of his feet. He'd lived near railroad tracks long enough to know what that meant. Somewhere in the distance, a train was approaching. "Danny," Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious while still remaining calm. "I need you and Rusty to step away from the tracks now. Come over here by my car." But Danny didn't move. Instead, he looked confused and scared. I thought you said trains hardly ever come through here. Are you sure? The vibration was becoming stronger now, and Marcus could see that Rusty was becoming agitated, pacing back and forth on the tracks and whining softly. Dogs had better hearing than humans, and Rusty was clearly picking up sounds that they couldn't detect yet. I'm sure, Marcus said, standing up and extending his hand toward Danny. Come on, son. We need to move away from here right now. That's when they heard it, a distant whistle, so faint it was almost lost in the morning air. But it was there, and it was getting closer. Danny's eyes widened with realization and fear. Oh no, he whispered. Rusty, come here, boy. But something was wrong. As Danny turned to leave the tracks, Rusty suddenly darted away from him, running further down the railroad line. The dog stopped, about 50 yards away, and began barking frantically, looking back at Danny and Marcus as if trying to tell them something urgent. Rusty! Danny called out, his voice cracking with panic. Come back! Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. The whistle was louder now, and the vibration in the ground was unmistakable. A train was definitely approaching, and while they couldn't see it yet through the trees and curves in the track, it was coming fast. Freight trains were heavy and took a long time to stop, even when the engineer saw an obstruction ahead. Danny, we need to get Rusty and get off these tracks now, Marcus said, his training kicking in as he assessed the rapidly developing situation. But as they both started running toward the dog, Marcus realized why Rusty had run ahead and was barking so desperately. There, barely visible in the morning shadows about 20 yards beyond where Rusty stood, was another figure on the tracks. Someone else was in danger, and the loyal dog had spotted them first. The whistle blew again, much closer now, and Marcus knew they were running out of time. What had started as a routine patrol was about to become the most important few minutes of his career, and possibly the most dangerous. Marcus squinted through the morning haze and felt his blood run cold. The figure Rusty had spotted was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, sitting motionless on the railroad tracks with his back against one of the rails. Even from this distance, Marcus could see that something was seriously wrong. The man wasn't moving, wasn't responding to Rusty's increasingly frantic barking, and appeared to be completely unaware of the approaching danger. Danny, stay here, Marcus commanded, but the boy was already running toward his dog, his small legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. The train whistle echoed again, much louder now, and Marcus could feel the rumble of the massive locomotive growing stronger beneath his feet. He pulled out his radio as he ran, calling for emergency backup and medical assistance, though he knew they would never arrive in time. As they got closer to the elderly man, Marcus could see more details that made his heart sink. The man was wearing pajamas under a thin bathrobe, and his feet were bare except for house slippers. His gray hair was disheveled, and he had a vacant, confused look in his eyes that Marcus recognized immediately. He'd seen it before in his grandmother during her final years, the unmistakable signs of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Sir, Marcus shouted as he reached the man. Sir, can you hear me? The elderly man looked up slowly, blinking in confusion. Where am I? He asked in a trembling voice. I was looking for my wife. Helen said she was going to make breakfast, but I can't find her anywhere. Danny arrived breathless, with Rusty jumping around his legs, still barking at the approaching train. Is he okay? Danny asked, his young voice filled with concern. Marcus knelt down beside the elderly man, his mind racing as he tried to assess the situation. The man was clearly disoriented and probably didn't understand where he was or what was happening. Trying to explain about the train might only confuse and frighten him more. What's your name, sir? Marcus asked gently, placing a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. Albert, the man replied after a moment of confusion. Albert Henshaw. But I don't know where I am. This doesn't look like my neighborhood. Have you seen Helen? She was supposed to make pancakes this morning. The train whistle blew again, and this time it was close enough that Marcus could hear the actual sound of the locomotive, the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails, and the deep rumble of the diesel engine. They had maybe 2 minutes before the train would round the bend and come into full view. Mr. Henshaw, Marcus said, standing up and extending his hands to help the elderly man to his feet. We need to move away from here right now. There's a train coming. But Albert Henshaw didn't seem to understand. He looked around confused, then tried to lie back down against the rail. I'm tired, he said. I just want to rest here for a while. Helen will find me when she's done with breakfast. Danny looked at Marcus with wide, frightened eyes. The train's getting closer, he said urgently. I can hear it better now. Marcus could hear it too. The sound was no longer distant, it was approaching rapidly, and he estimated they had less than 90 seconds before the locomotive would appear around the curve about half a mile down the track. Mr. Henshaw, Marcus said more firmly, I'm a police officer and I need you to stand up and come with me right now. It's not safe here. But Albert was becoming more agitated and confused. No, he said, pushing Marcus's hands away. I don't know you. Helen told me not to talk to strangers. I'm waiting right here for Helen. Marcus felt a moment of desperation. He could physically force the elderly man to move, but Albert was fragile, and any rough handling could injure him. At the same time, they were running out of options. The train was coming fast, and there was no way to stop it in time. That's when Danny stepped forward. Despite his fear, the 10-year-old boy seemed to understand that they needed a different approach. Mr. Henshaw, Danny said in a gentle voice, my name is Danny and this is my dog Rusty. We're friends of Helen's. She sent us to find you because she's worried. Albert looked at Danny with sudden interest. You know Helen? Where is she? I've been looking everywhere. She's safe, Danny continued, his voice steady despite the approaching danger. But she asked us to bring you home because she's making those pancakes you like. And she doesn't want them to get cold. Marcus watched in amazement as the boy's words seemed to break through Albert's confusion. The elderly man's eyes cleared slightly and he began trying to stand up. Helen's making pancakes? Albert asked hopefully. The ones with blueberries? Yes, sir. Danny nodded, helping to support Albert as he struggled to his feet. But we need to hurry because she's worried about you. The train whistle blew again, much louder now, and Marcus could see a light beginning to appear through the trees down the track. The locomotive was approaching the final curve before their section of track. Move, Marcus shouted, finally allowing urgency to enter his voice. The train's almost here. But Albert was moving slowly, confused by his surroundings and unsteady on his feet. His house slippers weren't meant for walking on gravel and railroad ties, and he stumbled with almost every step. Marcus made a quick decision. Danny, you and Rusty get clear of the tracks right now. Get at least 50 feet away. What about Mr. Henshaw? Danny asked, but he was already moving, pulling Rusty with him toward the safety of the grass beside the railroad right-of-way. Marcus wrapped his arm around Albert's waist and tried to help him move faster, but the elderly man was frail and disoriented. They were making progress, but slowly. Too slowly. The train whistle blared again, and now Marcus could see the locomotive clearly as it rounded the bend. The engineer had spotted them and was sounding the emergency warning. But Marcus knew from experience that a fully loaded freight, train traveling at high speed, needed at least a quarter mile to come to a complete stop. They weren't going to make it to safety in time at this pace, Mr. Henshaw, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm. I need to carry you now, okay? Helen is waiting, and we don't want to keep her waiting too long. Albert nodded weakly and Marcus swept him up in his arms. The elderly man weighed much less than Marcus had expected. Probably no more than 130 pounds, but carrying him while trying to run on the uneven surface of railroad ballast was challenging. The train was now close enough that Marcus could see the engineer in the cab, frantically working the controls and blowing the whistle continuously. The locomotive's headlight was blazing, and the ground was shaking with the power of the approaching machine. Marcus pushed himself harder than he ever had before, his legs pumping as he carried Albert toward safety. Behind him, he could hear the screech of steel wheels on steel rails as the engineer applied the emergency brakes. But the train's momentum was too great to stop quickly. Just as Marcus reached the edge of the railroad right-of-way, he stumbled on the loose gravel and began to fall forward with Albert still in his arms. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus felt himself losing balance. Albert Henshaw was still in his arms, and they were both about to hit the ground hard just as the freight train thundered past. In that split second, Marcus twisted his body to shield Albert from the impact, knowing that the fragile elderly man wouldn't survive a fall onto the rocky ballast. But instead of hitting the ground, Marcus felt strong hands grabbing his shoulders and pulling him backward. Danny, despite being just 10 years old, had rushed forward and was using all his strength to help pull them both to safety. The boy's face was determined, his small hands gripping Marcus's uniform shirt as he dug his heels into the grass and pulled with everything he had. They all tumbled backward together, landing in a heap on the soft grass just as the massive locomotive roared past, its air horn blasting and emergency brakes shrieking against the rails. The wind from the passing train washed over them, and the ground shook so violently that it felt like an earthquake. Marcus held Albert tightly against his chest, shielding him from the dust and debris kicked up by the train. Danny had thrown himself protectively over both of them, and Rusty was barking frantically while running in circles around the group. The freight train was long, at least 60 cars, and it took nearly 2 minutes for the entire convoy to pass. When the last car finally disappeared around the bend ahead, an eerie silence fell over the area, broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing and Rusty's continued agitated whimpering. Marcus sat up slowly, still holding Albert, and looked at Danny with amazement. "Are you okay?" he asked the boy. Danny nodded, though Marcus could see that his hands were shaking. "Is Mr. Henshaw all right?" Albert was blinking in confusion, looking around at his surroundings as if seeing them for the first time. "What happened?" he asked weakly. "Why is there so much noise? Where's Helen?" "You're safe now, Mr. Henshaw," Marcus said gently, helping the elderly man sit up. "We're going to find Helen and get you home." Marcus quickly examined Albert for injuries. Amazingly, except for some scrapes on his hands and knees from the fall, the elderly man seemed to be physically unharmed. His mental confusion, however, was clearly severe. "Danny," Marcus said, turning to the boy, "what you just did was incredibly brave. You probably saved all our lives." Danny looked embarrassed by the praise. "Rusty helped too," he said, reaching down to pet his dog, who had finally calmed down and was now sitting alertly beside them. "He's the one who spotted Mr. Henshaw first." Marcus looked at the dog with new respect. Rusty had indeed been the hero who had alerted them to the danger. Without the dog's keen senses and protective instincts, they might never have noticed Albert on the tracks until it was too late. "You're right," Marcus said, scratching Rusty behind the ears. "Good boy, Rusty. Very good boy." The dog's tail wagged for the first time since they'd encountered him, and Marcus could see the relief in Danny's eyes. It was clear that the boy and his dog had an extraordinary bond. Marcus's radio crackled to life. "Unit 17, what's your status? We received your emergency call but lost communication." "Unit 17 here," Marcus responded, helping Albert to his feet while keeping a supporting arm around him. "Crisis resolved. We have an elderly male who appears to be suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. He's physically unharmed, but needs immediate medical evaluation and assistance getting home. Also requesting family services to check on living situation." "Copy that." "Ambulance is en route, ETA 3 minutes." Albert was looking around with increasing agitation. "I want to go home," he said, his voice rising with distress. "I want Helen. Where is Helen?" Danny stepped closer to Albert and spoke in the same gentle voice he'd used before. "Mr. Henshaw, Helen is safe at home. The nice policeman is going to help us find her, and she'll be so happy to see you." "She will?" Albert asked hopefully. "Absolutely." Danny nodded with conviction. "She's been worried about you." Marcus was impressed by the boy's natural empathy and ability to communicate with Albert. Most adults would have struggled to know what to say to someone in Albert's confused state, but Danny seemed to instinctively understand how to provide comfort and reassurance. "Danny," Marcus said quietly,
"Can you stay with Mr. Henshaw for a minute while I make some calls?"
"Just keep talking to him the way you've been doing." As Danny continued to chat softly with Albert about Helen and pancakes, Marcus stepped a few feet away and began making the necessary calls. He contacted the local hospital to alert them about an incoming elderly patient with dementia, then began checking missing persons reports to see if anyone had reported Albert Henshaw missing. Within minutes, Marcus had located the information he needed. Albert Henshaw, age 76, had been reported missing by his daughter 3 hours earlier. He lived in an assisted living facility about 2 miles away, and his daughter had arrived that morning to find his room empty and his bed unslept in. The facility's security cameras showed him wandering out a side door around 5 o'clock that morning. The tragic part of the story became clear when Marcus spoke with Albert's daughter on the phone. Helen, Albert's wife of 52 years, had passed away 6 months earlier. Albert's dementia had progressed rapidly after her death, and he frequently forgot that she was gone. He would often wander off looking for her, convinced that she was just in another room or had gone to the store. Marcus felt his heart break as he realized that Albert's confusion wasn't just about being lost. He was lost in time, still living in a world where his beloved wife was alive and waiting for him to come home for breakfast. The ambulance arrived just as Marcus was finishing his calls. The paramedics were gentle and experienced with elderly patients, and they quickly assessed Albert's condition, while Danny continued to provide comfort by staying close and speaking in reassuring tones. "He keeps asking about Helen," Danny told the lead paramedic. "I've been telling him she's safe at home because it seems to make him feel better." The paramedic nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. With dementia patients, it's often kinder to go along with their reality, rather than constantly correcting them. You did great, son." As they were loading Albert into the ambulance, he looked around frantically. "Where's the boy?" he asked. "Where's Danny?" "He knows Helen. He said Helen sent him." Danny stepped forward and took Albert's hand. "I'm right here, Mr. Henshaw. You're going to be fine. The doctors are going to take good care of you, and your family will be there soon." "Will you tell Helen I'm okay?" Albert asked anxiously. "Tell her I'll be home soon for those pancakes." Danny looked at Marcus uncertainly, not sure how to respond. Marcus nodded encouragingly. "I'll make sure she knows," Danny promised solemnly. As the ambulance drove away, Marcus turned his attention back to Danny and Rusty. The immediate crisis was over, but he realized he still didn't know the full story about why they had been on the railroad tracks in the first place. Now that the immediate danger had passed, Marcus found himself looking more carefully at Danny and Rusty. The boy was sitting on the grass beside the railroad tracks, his arm wrapped around his dog, both of them still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of their close call. But there were other details that Marcus was noticing now. Details that suggested Danny's story was more complicated than a simple early morning walk. The boy's backpack, which Marcus had glimpsed earlier, was actually a worn school bag stuffed full of what looked like clothing and other belongings. Danny's shoes were not just old, they were completely inappropriate for the cool morning weather. His jeans had holes that weren't fashionable tears but actual wear from use, and his thin t-shirt offered little protection against the morning chill. Most telling of all, now that Marcus was paying attention, he could see that both Danny and Rusty looked like they hadn't had a good meal in a while. The boy's face had the thin, hollow look of someone who wasn't eating regularly, and Rusty, despite his alertness and energy, was definitely underweight. "Danny," Marcus said gently, sitting down on the grass beside the boy. "Now that Mr. Henshaw is safe, can you tell me what you and Rusty were really doing out here this morning?" Danny's shoulders tensed again and he looked away. "I told you we were just walking." "I know that's what you told me," Marcus said patiently. "But I'm thinking maybe there's more to the story. Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head quickly. "No, nobody hurt us. We needed to find somewhere to go." Marcus felt his heart sink. He had suspected as much, but hearing Danny confirm it made the situation real. "Where did you sleep last night, son?" Danny was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Rusty's fur. Finally, he said, "There's an old bridge about a mile that way. It has a spot underneath where it's dry. Rusty and I have been staying there for a few days." "A few days?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "What about before that? Where do you normally live?" That's when the whole story began to come out. Danny Martinez was 11 years old, not 10 as Marcus had guessed. He had been living with his grandmother for the past 3 years after his mother had died in a car accident, and his father had disappeared. His grandmother, Rosa Martinez, had been his whole world, the only person who had ever really taken care of him consistently. 3 weeks earlier, Rosa had suffered a massive stroke while Danny was at school. By the time Danny got home that afternoon, she was already in the hospital, unconscious. She died 2 days later without ever waking up. "The social workers came to the house," Danny explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "They said I couldn't stay there by myself and they were going to put me in foster care. But they also said that Rusty couldn't come with me. They said most foster families don't take pets, especially big dogs." Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, not at Danny or even at the social workers who were probably just doing their job, but at a system that could separate a child from his only remaining companion. "So you ran away," Marcus said, understanding. Danny nodded. "I couldn't leave Rusty. My grandmother gave him to me when I was 8, right after my mom died. She said every boy needed a loyal friend, and Rusty was going to be mine. I can't just abandon him." Marcus looked at Rusty, who was sitting calmly beside Danny, occasionally licking the boy's face as if sensing his distress. The bond between them was obvious and deep. Rusty wasn't just Danny's pet. He was his family, his protector, and probably the only stable relationship the boy had left in the world. "Where have you been getting food?" Marcus asked. "There's a dumpster behind the grocery store," Danny admitted, clearly embarrassed. "Sometimes they throw away bread and stuff that's still okay to eat. And there's a water fountain at the park for Rusty." The image of this brave, intelligent child digging through garbage to feed himself and his dog was almost more than Marcus could bear. But he also recognized something else in Danny's story, a fierce loyalty and determination that reminded him why he had become a police officer in the first place. "Danny," Marcus said carefully, "you know you can't keep living like this, right? It's not safe, and winter's coming soon. You and Rusty need somewhere warm and secure to stay." "I know," Danny said, his voice breaking slightly, "but I don't know what to do. If I go back to the social workers, they'll take Rusty away, and I'll probably never see him again. He's all I have left." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. He had dealt with situations like this before, but never one that had touched him quite so personally. Maybe it was because of what they had just been through together. Or maybe it was because Danny reminded him of himself at that age, alone and scared but trying to be brave. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "When you saw Mr. Henshaw on the tracks, why didn't you just run away? Most kids would have been scared and left it to the adults to handle." Danny looked surprised by the question. "I couldn't just leave him there. He was confused and scared, and that train was coming. Rusty knew something was wrong too, that's why he ran ahead and started barking." "But you could have been killed," Marcus pointed out. "You risked your life for a stranger." "So did you," Danny replied simply. "And he wasn't really a stranger. He was just a scared old man who missed his wife." Marcus realized that this 11-year-old boy had just articulated something that many adults never understood, that helping others in need wasn't about calculating risks or expecting rewards. It was about basic human decency and compassion. "Danny," Marcus said, making a decision that he hoped wouldn't get him in trouble with his superiors, "I want to help you figure this out. But I need you to trust me, okay? No more running away. No more sleeping under bridges. Can you promise me that?" Danny looked at him suspiciously. "You're not going to call the social workers right away, are you?" "I'm going to call them eventually," Marcus said honestly. "But first I want to explore some other options. There might be ways to keep you and Rusty together that nobody has thought of yet." "Really?" Danny's eyes lit up with the first hope Marcus had seen from him. "Really? But you have to help me by being honest and staying put while I make some calls and talk to some people. Deal?" Danny looked down at Rusty, who wagged his tail as if he understood the conversation. "What do you think, boy? Should we trust Officer Rivera?" Rusty barked once and licked Danny's face, which seemed to be all the answer the boy needed. "Okay," Danny said, extending his small hand to shake Marcus's much larger one. "Deal." As they shook hands, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had just promised to help solve a problem that had no easy answers. But looking at Danny's hopeful face and Rusty's trusting eyes, he knew he had to try. The first step would be getting them somewhere safe and fed while he figured out their options. The second step would be much harder, finding a way to keep a family together in a system that wasn't designed to recognize that sometimes family isn't defined by blood relations or legal documents, but by love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds forged through shared hardship. Marcus drove Danny and Rusty to the police station, but not in the back of his patrol car like a criminal. Instead, he let them sit in the front seat, with Rusty's head hanging out the window, and Danny looking around nervously as they passed through the familiar streets of his neighborhood. "I've never been inside a police station before," Danny admitted as they pulled into the parking lot. "There's nothing scary about it," Marcus assured him. "It's just an office building where people like me do paperwork and try to solve problems." The first person they encountered inside was Sergeant Patricia Chen, a veteran officer who had seen just about everything in her 20-year career. She took one look at the thin boy and his loyal dog and immediately understood that this wasn't a typical situation. "Rivera," she said quietly, pulling Marcus aside while Danny waited in the lobby with Rusty. "Please tell me you're not about to create a bureaucratic nightmare." Marcus quickly filled her in on the morning's events, the rescue at the railroad tracks, Danny's situation with his grandmother's death, and his refusal to be separated from Rusty. Sergeant Chen listened without interrupting, occasionally glancing over at the boy who was sitting on the floor with his arms wrapped around his dog. "And what exactly is your plan?" she asked when Marcus finished. "I want to find alternatives before we call Children's Services," Marcus said. "There has to be a way to keep them together." Sergeant Chen sighed. "Rivera, you know as well as I do that the system doesn't work that way. Foster families are screened and approved for children, not pets. And this isn't just any pet. That's a large dog that requires food, veterinary care, and space." "I know all that," Marcus said. "But this kid just risked his life to help save a stranger. He's been living on the streets for weeks rather than abandon his dog. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for a lot," Sergeant Chen agreed. "But good character doesn't change the rules." That's when Marcus got an idea. "What if we could find someone who's already approved as a foster family, but also willing to take the dog? There must be someone in the system who would understand." Sergeant Chen raised an eyebrow. "And how do you propose to find this hypothetical perfect foster family?" "I want to make some calls," Marcus said. "Give me a couple of hours before we contact Children's Services. If I can't find a solution by then, I'll handle the official report myself." After some discussion, Sergeant Chen agreed to give Marcus until the end of the day. In the meantime, Danny and Rusty could stay at the station where they would be safe, fed, and warm. Marcus started by calling Maria Santos, a social worker he had worked with on several cases over the years. Maria had always impressed him with her dedication to finding creative solutions for difficult situations, even when it meant bending a few rules. "Marcus," Maria said when he explained the situation, "you're asking me to find something that probably doesn't exist. Foster families go through months of training and background checks. They're not prepared to suddenly take on a large dog along with a traumatized child." "But what if there was someone?" Marcus pressed. "What if there was a foster family who already had experience with both kids and animals?" Maria was quiet for a moment. "There might be one possibility," she said finally. "But it's complicated." She told Marcus about Sarah and Tom Mitchell, a couple in their early 40s who had been foster parents for over 10 years. They lived on a small farm outside of town and had successfully fostered dozens of children over the years. They were known for taking difficult cases, kids who had been rejected by other families or had special needs that made them hard to place. The Mitchells also had experience with animals. Their farm was home to several rescue dogs, cats, horses, and other animals that they rehabilitated and found homes for. But there was a complication. They had recently decided to take a break from fostering after their last placement had been particularly challenging. A 15-year-old who had been in 12 different homes, Maria explained. It took them 8 months to help him stabilize, and when he finally aged out of the system and moved on, Sarah told me they needed some time to recover emotionally. "How long ago was that?" Marcus asked. "About 6 weeks. They're supposed to be on a sabbatical for at least 6 months. Marcus felt his hopes deflating, but Maria wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "if there was ever a case that might bring them back early, this could be it. Sarah has a soft spot for kids who are protecting animals, and Tom grew up with dogs. The problem is convincing them to cut their break short." "Can you call them?" Marcus asked. "I can try. But Marcus, you need to understand that even if they say yes, there are still procedures to follow. Danny would need to be placed in temporary emergency care first while the paperwork gets processed. That could take days or even weeks." Marcus looked across the station lobby where Danny was teaching Rusty to shake hands with various officers who had stopped by to meet them. The boy had a natural way with people, and even the gruffest veterans were smiling as they watched Rusty perform tricks. "What if we could expedite the process?" Marcus asked. "This is an emergency situation and the child is currently homeless." "I'll see what I can do," Maria promised. "Give me an hour." While Maria made her calls, Marcus decided to learn more about Danny's background. He contacted the school district and discovered that Danny had been an excellent student before his grandmother's death. Honor roll every semester, perfect attendance, and glowing reports from teachers who described him as mature, helpful, and kind to other students. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, remembered Danny well. "He was one of those kids you never had to worry about," she told Marcus over the phone. "Always had his homework done, always willing to help classmates who were struggling. When he stopped coming to school after his grandmother died, we tried to follow up. But the house was empty. We assumed he had moved away to live with relatives." Marcus also learned more about Rosa Martinez, Danny's grandmother. She had been a beloved figure in the neighborhood, known for taking in stray animals and helping elderly neighbors with shopping and household tasks. Several people described her as a woman who never turned away anyone in need. "She raised that boy right," said Mrs. Chen, no relation to Sergeant Chen, who had lived next door to Rosa for 15 years. After his mother died, Rosa made sure he never felt like he was a burden. She taught him to be responsible and caring. That dog of his was part of the family. Rosa always said that Rusty was the best thing that ever happened to Danny. As Marcus gathered this information, he began to understand that Danny wasn't just a homeless child who happened to have a dog. He was a young person who had been raised with strong values about loyalty, responsibility, and caring for others. Values that were being tested by an impossible situation. Maria called back after an hour and a half. "I have good news and challenging news," she said. "Give me the good news first," Marcus replied. "The Mitchells want to meet Danny and Rusty." Sarah actually started crying when I told her about the railroad rescue. She said any kid brave enough to risk his life for a stranger and loyal enough to live on the streets rather than abandon his dog was exactly the kind of child they became. Foster parents to help. And the challenging news? The bureaucracy is still the bureaucracy. Even with emergency placement procedures, it's going to take at least 48 hours to get all the paperwork approved. Danny can't stay at the police station for 2 days. Marcus felt frustrated. They were so close to a solution, but the system was still putting obstacles in their way. That's when Sergeant Chen approached with a suggestion that surprised everyone. "What if Danny and Rusty stayed with a police family tonight?" she said. "Just temporarily until the foster placement gets approved." Marcus looked at her in surprise. "Are you volunteering?" "Actually, I was thinking about you," Sergeant Chen replied. "You're single, you have a house with a yard, and you're already invested in this case. It would be unofficial, of course, just a police officer providing emergency shelter to a child in need while proper placement is arranged." Marcus felt his heart racing. He had never considered becoming a foster parent himself, even temporarily. His job was demanding, his schedule was unpredictable, and he had always assumed that childcare required skills he didn't possess. But looking at Danny across the lobby, still patiently playing with Rusty while various officers stopped to chat with them, Marcus realized that maybe the skills required weren't so different from the ones that had made him a good police officer. Patience, compassion, and a willingness to help people who were in trouble. "What do you think, Danny?" Marcus called out. "Would you and Rusty like to come stay at my house tonight while we get everything set up with the Mitchell family?" Danny's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Really, you'd let us stay with you?" "Just temporarily," Marcus said. Though even as he said it, he realized that he was already thinking about what groceries he would need to buy and whether his guest bedroom had clean sheets. "What about Rusty?" Danny asked anxiously. Marcus walked over and knelt down to pet the dog, who responded by licking his hand enthusiastically. "Rusty's welcome too. I think he's earned his place as an honorary member of the police force after this morning." As they prepared to leave the station, Marcus realized that this case was changing him in ways he hadn't. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the smell of eggs and toast coming from his kitchen. For a confused moment, he couldn't remember why someone else would be cooking in his house. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. He found Danny at the stove, carefully flipping scrambled eggs while Rusty sat nearby, watching hopefully for any dropped food. The boy was wearing the same clothes as yesterday, but he had clearly washed his face and tried to comb his hair. "I hope it's okay that I made breakfast," Danny said when he saw Marcus. "I found eggs and bread in your refrigerator, and I wanted to do something to say thank you for letting us stay here." Marcus was touched by the gesture but also concerned. "Danny, you're the guest here. You don't need to cook for me. My grandmother always said that if someone helps you, you should find a way to help them back," Danny replied, plating the eggs with surprising skill for an 11-year-old. "She taught me how to cook basic stuff in case she ever got sick and couldn't do it." As they ate breakfast together, Marcus realized that Rosa Martinez had indeed raised Danny well. The boy had table manners, cleaned up after himself, and made sure Rusty had fresh water before sitting down to eat. Despite everything he had been through, Danny was polite, grateful, and remarkably mature. "Are we really going to meet the Mitchell family today?" Danny asked, trying to keep the hope out of his voice but not quite succeeding. "That's the plan," Marcus confirmed. Maria is picking us up at 10 o'clock to drive out to their farm. The Mitchell farm was about 30 minutes outside of town, down a winding country road lined with oak trees. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, Danny pressed his face to the car window, taking in the sight of rolling pastures, a red barn, and several horses grazing in a nearby field. "It's like something from a movie," Danny whispered. Sarah Mitchell was waiting on the front porch of the farmhouse, a woman in her early 40s with graying brown hair and kind eyes. She was flanked by two dogs, a golden retriever and what looked like a border collie mix, both wagging their tails in greeting. Before anyone could make formal introductions, Rusty bounded out of the car and immediately began playing with the Mitchell dogs, all three of them racing around the yard in circles while barking joyfully. "Well, that's a good sign," said Tom Mitchell, emerging from the barn and wiping his hands on a work rag. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who spent his days working outdoors. Sarah stepped forward and knelt down to Danny's eye level. "You must be Danny. I'm Sarah, and that's my husband, Tom. We've heard a lot about you." "You have?" Danny asked nervously. "All good things," Sarah assured him. "We heard about how brave you were yesterday, helping to save Mr. Henshaw, and we heard about how loyal you've been to Rusty. Those are exactly the kinds of qualities we admire in this family." Tom joined them, and Marcus could see Danny sizing up these potential new guardians. The boy was clearly hopeful, but also scared of being disappointed again. "Would you like to see the animals?" Tom asked. "We've got horses, chickens, a couple of pigs, and more cats than I can count." Danny's eyes lit up. "Really, can Rusty come too?" "Of course," Sarah said. "Our dogs will show him around." As they toured the farm, Marcus watched Danny gradually relax. Tom explained how they cared for the various animals, many of which were rescues that had been abused or abandoned. Sarah showed Danny the chicken coop and let him help collect eggs, which he did with gentle competence. "My grandmother had chickens when I was little," Danny explained as he carefully placed eggs in a basket. "Before we moved to the house in town, she taught me how to hold them so they wouldn't break." "Your grandmother sounds like she was a very wise woman," Sarah said. "She was," Danny agreed quietly. "She always said that taking care of animals teaches you how to take care of people too." Marcus felt a lump forming in his throat. Even in the midst of his own tragedy, Danny was able to talk about his grandmother with love rather than bitterness. After the farm tour, they sat on the front porch while the dogs played in the yard. Maria had brought all the necessary paperwork, and she began explaining the foster care process to everyone involved. "This would be a temporary placement initially," she explained, "typically lasting 6 months to a year while we explore permanent options. Danny, that might include trying to locate other relatives who could take you in, or it might eventually lead to adoption if that's what everyone wants." Danny looked scared. "What if you find relatives who don't want Rusty?" Sarah reached over and took Danny's hand. "That's not going to happen," she said firmly. "Tom and I have been foster parents for a long time, and we've learned that keeping families together is the most important thing, even when that family includes 4-legged members." "But what if the rules say—" Danny began. "The rules say a lot of things," Tom interrupted gently, "but they also say that the best interests of the child come first, and anyone can see that separating you from Rusty wouldn't be in your best interests." Marcus watched this exchange with growing admiration for the Mitchell family. They understood exactly what Danny needed to hear, and they were making promises they clearly intended to keep. "There's something else we need to discuss," Sarah said, looking at Maria. "Tom and I have been talking, and if this placement works out well for everyone, we'd like to explore adopting Danny permanently." Danny's mouth fell open. "Adopt me, really?" "Really," Tom confirmed. "We fostered a lot of wonderful kids over the years, but most of them eventually go back to their families or age out of the system. We've been hoping to find the right child to make a permanent part of our family." "And Rusty too?" Danny asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Especially Rusty," Sarah laughed. "Any dog loyal enough to help save someone's life deserves a permanent home with plenty of space to run and play." As they drove back to town that afternoon, Danny was quiet for a long time. Finally, he turned to Marcus and asked, "Do you really think this could work out? Do you think they really want me?" "Danny," Marcus said, "I've been a police officer for 8 years and I've gotten pretty good at reading people. The Mitchells aren't just being kind, they genuinely want you to be part of their family. They see the same things in you that I saw yesterday morning when you helped save Mr. Henshaw. What things? Courage, loyalty, compassion. The willingness to risk everything for someone else. Those aren't common qualities, especially in someone your age. Danny was quiet again, then said, "Will I still be able to see you sometimes? Even after I move to the farm?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. Over the past 24 hours, he had grown more attached to this brave, kind boy than he had expected. "Of course. I want to hear all about how you're doing in school, and how Rusty likes farm life." 3 weeks later, Marcus received a call at the police station. It was Danny calling from his new home with the Mitchells. "Officer Rivera," Danny said excitedly, "you have to come visit us. Rusty learned how to herd sheep, and Sarah is teaching me how to drive the tractor. And Tom says I'm a natural with the horses." "That sounds wonderful," Marcus replied, genuinely happy to hear the joy in Danny's voice. "And guess what? We went to visit Mr. Henshaw at his new care facility. I told him that Helen says hello, and he smiled for the first time since the nurses said he'd been there. They said I can come back and visit him whenever I want." Marcus smiled, not surprised that Danny was already finding ways to help others. It seemed to be part of his nature. "There's one more thing," Danny said, his voice becoming more serious. "Sarah and Tom said that if it wasn't for you believing in us and refusing to give up, none of this would have happened. They want to invite you to dinner on Sunday so they can thank you properly." "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said. "You and Rusty saved yourselves by being the kind of people and dog worth fighting for." As Marcus hung up the phone, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning 3 weeks ago, when he had spotted a small figure walking along the railroad tracks. He had started that day as a police officer doing his job. He had ended it as something more. Someone who had learned that sometimes the most important part of protecting and serving meant fighting not just against crime, but against systems and circumstances that threatened to separate people from the ones they loved. The official report would show that Officer Marcus Rivera had assisted in the rescue of an elderly man with dementia and facilitated the successful placement of a homeless minor with an approved foster family. But the real story was about how an 11-year-old boy and his loyal dog had reminded everyone they met about the power of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that make us family. 6 months later, the adoption papers were finalized and Danny Martinez officially became Danny Mitchell. Rusty was there for the ceremony, wearing a bow tie that Sarah had insisted on, wagging his tail as the judge pronounced them a forever family. Marcus was there too, in his dress uniform, watching from the back of the courtroom with tears in his eyes. As they all walked out together, Danny ran up to him one last time. "Thank you for not giving up on us," the boy said, giving Marcus a fierce hug. "Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like," Marcus replied. And as he watched the Mitchell family walk away, Sarah and Tom on either side of Danny, with Rusty trotting proudly beside them, Marcus knew that some row